Matthew 1 through 12.
Okay.
And so we decided, and we started into 13, but we never really got into it completely, so we decided to go back and start at the beginning of 13. And our intention is to try to get through at least one chapter a week to finish by Advent, and then go into the four weeks of Advent, and actually just read some Bible passages during Advent to help us be in the Advent mood.
Okay.
So that's our plan for the fall. This is a discussion group. It's not a lecture, and we're looking for input and ideas and comments and discussion. Because when Brian does this, he prepares
It's a lecture.
written lecture and basically gives a lecture, and it gets him off track when you interrupt, even though I made sure I did it every time I could.
Okay.
Because I was trying to get to what I'm used to, which is a discussion group.
Okay.
So this is an adult Bible discussion group as opposed to adult
Lecture.
lecture.
Okay, great.
So that's sort of the preamble. So I do want to, and the book I use for reference is Barclay's book on Matthew.
Okay.
And the reason that is because that's the one Brian suggested. We did the first half of Matthew with the other volume of this, so that's what we're doing. But that doesn't mean you can't bring other references. I was looking at another Bible that has historical information and stuff in it. That was useful. So whatever Bibles you have, every Bible translation is a little different, so there's different nuances. So we're looking for those kind of differences as well. But I do want to start talking about parables, and Pat and I had this discussion yesterday afternoon because she was confused about parables. Why does he talk in parables? Well, I won't read the whole thing, but I want to point out some of the key parts of Barclay things. First off, 13 is the turning point of Jesus' ministry from him teaching in synagogues to teaching at the seashore or other places, out and about. And part of this was because, as we remember from our earlier studies, Jesus was starting to be persecuted by the scribes and Pharisees for his beliefs and the way he was teaching with authority. So he was starting to be shut out from the synagogues. The people wanted to hear him, but the leaders didn't. And the leaders were trying to find things basically to eventually put him on trial, which they did. So he found that it was better to get out of, even while he would still go to the synagogues, he was trying to get to the masses, and he did that better by being out and about. And the seashore was one of the places he did that. The reason he would teach in parables was a parable is a truth in pictures. So you tell a story and you set the stage for what you want to message you want to get across. And Barclay talks about the difference between a parable and an allegory. Allegory, you dissect and study every word. A parable, you want to hear the overall story, and it typically has one message in the story. And that's why you'll see a bunch of little parables. Some of them are only a sentence or two, because each of them is a self-contained story. And parables is a good way to reach people because it makes the truth something they can relate to or concrete. For example, if you use the word beauty, how do you describe beauty? But you can describe and say, this person is a beautiful person. Oh, now I understand what you mean by beauty because of what I see it in this person. Or goodness. How do you describe goodness? But you say this is a good person or a good deed or a good act or something. That makes it understandable.
Well, they're metaphors, right? The stories are metaphors. The parables are.
Yeah, I think
they're written for blue collar back then.
Right. The other thing is it compels interest. and it allows the hearer to discover the truth for himself, herself. Here's the story. It's up to your interpretation. And what do you think? What does it mean to you? And it's a better way of reaching the people. And it also means that the people who are too lazy to think or too blinded in their prejudice to see won't see it, and therefore it won't have any meaning to them. So those are the key points that Barclay brings out as far as parables. It was amazing. I mean, that's 2.5 pages worth of discussion of parables, which was news to me. So the first parable that he talks about is the parable of the sower. A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 160 or 30 times what was sown. He who has ears, let him hear. So what is that? Does anybody understand what that means? I know that later he does explain it, but did anybody understand that? What his parable was, what he was talking about?
Well, you're sowing seeds, so you're going to plant seeds, and the seeds that you're planting, you hope, will grow and will yield a crop, a nourishment. And that isn't going to happen to all the seeds because of the perils that he describes in this metaphor. And that's a metaphor for life, really.
Yeah, that's what I think too.
Yeah.
In circumstances.
There is good soil out there, and you will get a crop, but there's a lot of hazards in life, and you're going to run into them, and they're going to destroy a lot of those seeds. So to expect that to happen, and you got to figure out which soil you want to grow in, and you can go ahead and yield a bountiful crop, or you can, if the wind blows you and you're willing to go into the weeds, you will not yield a crop. At least that's what I think. I don't know. That's a famous parable.
Yeah. So the disciples came and asked him, why do you speak to people in parables? And he replied, the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven have been given to you, but not to them. Whoever has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even when he has been taken, even what he has will be taken from him. This is why I speak in parables to him. Though seeing they do not see, though hearing they do not hear or understand. So Barclay points out, was he trying to confuse people? And the answer was no, he was just trying to talk to them in terms they understood. This was an agrarian group, typically, and they were used to having analogies or parable stories by things that they knew, which was harvests and sowing seeds and that. So it was easier to talk to them on that. In them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. You will never be hearing, but you will be ever hearing, but never understanding. You will be seeing, but never perceiving. For this people's heart has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears. They have closed their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand in their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them. But blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears because they hear. And he's talking now again to his disciples. For I tell you the truth, many prophets and righteous men long to see what you see, but do not see, and hear what you hear, but do not hear it. So again, he's trying to get his disciples to understand that he's going to be telling them what these things mean, and trying to get them to understand so that they can then later go out to talk to and preach his good news to others.
But don't expect them to all sign up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's going to take a while to get these messages through, and
Don't be
hopefully-
discouraged.
exactly.
Yeah.
The next section, next little, starting at 18, says what the parable of the sower means. Would someone like to read 18 through 23? Okay.
Listen then to what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in his heart. This is the seed sown along the path. The one who receives the seed that fell on rocky places is the man who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. But since he has no root, he lasts only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, he quickly falls away. The one who receives the seed that fell among the thorns is the man who hears the word, but the worries of his life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke it, making it unfruitful. But the one who receives the seed that fell on good soil is the man who hears the word and understands it. He produces a crop yielding 100, 60, or 30 times what is sown.
The cultural Bible I was looking at this morning said the typical yield for a good farmer in his field was 7.5 times. So saying something 100 or more, 30 even, was tremendously good yield. So that was the message he was also trying to give, which, unless you have these contexts for these things, you don't really understand them. I mean, 100 sounds great, or 30 sounds, but it was significantly more than a typical crop yield. Barclay also goes in to explain, one of the things he said about parables is you really need to understand about the times and practices of that time to understand how things were done. So, for example, in Palestine, the fields were typically in long, narrow strips, and usually along a right-of-way, so that it was a common path. So if you were sowing the seed and it fell on that hardened ground or common path, and they also said that most of the soil in that area is all rocky anyway. So it was very common to have seed not take root or take root in very shallow covered soil. And then he said the thorny ground was deceptive. When the sower was sowing, the ground would look clean enough, but it was easy to make a garden look clean simply by turning it over. But the ground still lay the fibrous roots of crouch grass and bishopweed and all the perennial pests, which were ready to spring to life again. And the gardener knows that that weeds sown with speed and strength equal a few good seeds can equal. Sorry, I'm fighting off this cold that I'm having trouble. So here he's trying to get a message about the kingdom of heaven, and he's using this parable to explain what heaven's all about and what it takes to get to heaven. which is what you just read. Okay, there's another parable starting on 24. Does somebody feel comfortable reading 24 through 30?
I'll do it.
Okay?
Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the weeds sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from?" "An enemy did this," he replied. The servants asked him, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" "No," he answered, "because while you are pulling the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned, and gather the wheat and bring it into my barn."
Okay.
So you gotta separate the sheep from the goats.
What's that?
I said, he said when, toward the end of your life, here, it's the same parable that what I get is the same message is that I'm gonna separate the sheep from the goats.
Oh,
I'm gonna separate
Oh.
the chaff from the grain.
Right.
right.
And burn the stuff, so you always go back to fire in these days.
Right, and
That's true.
the thing about it is if you need to have, it's hard to separate it when it's not fully mature. Therefore, it's hard to decipher a good person from a not a good person until it's you can really understand the situation and the maturity. If you're trying to separate them out early on, it's hard to separate. But once you see how things have progressed, you'll know better to be able to separate the good from the bad.
Right. But you wait till things mature, which
Right.
is kind of interesting.
And-
That's
and-
us.
Yeah, and the other piece.
Look around, you see if there's any weeds.
So here's the things that Barclay points out. There's always a hostile power in the world seeking and waiting to destroy a good seed. And it's hard to distinguish between those who are good and not. May appear good, but in fact may be bad. I mean, you may look on the surface that they're doing good things, but they're not. It also teaches us not to be quick in judgments. If you try to do something very quickly, you may not make the right decision. So don't try to judge. You need to judge it based on the whole man, the whole life, not just one instance. And the judgment comes at the end, not during the course of life.
Right.
It also teaches us that the only person who can judge is God. Now, you get all that out of that parable, only with the help of Barclay, frankly. But the two things that he wants to point out was it's a warning not to judge people at all, and that the warning comes at the end of the judgment is God.
Yeah, and he's speaking in first person. He says, "I will.
Right.
I'll make the call."
Yes. And he's speaking for the Father. Okay, and the next little parable is kind of short. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Although it's the smallest of all your seeds, when it grows, it is the largest garden of the garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds in the air come and perch in its branches. So what do we get out of that?
I kind of get out of that the old "me shall inherit the earth" feeling about it. When I read it, it just comes into my head. Because he said the smallest seed, mustard seed is the smallest, but if I plant it, it's going to grow into the larger, it's going to grow into a tree. And the birds and all that stuff's going to happen. So there's going to be a yield. Even though it's the smallest, look out, it's going to turn out to be beautiful when it grows. And that takes me to his saying, "Meek shall inherit the earth." Look out. There was I don't know if it was in our Bible study a couple of weeks ago, that said that there is power in weakness. God's power is in weakness. And boy, you got to turn that one over for a while. Think about that. And that kind of crawls out here for me. Sometimes people will rally around to someone in distress more strongly than they would at any other time. And I got thinking, yeah, I've seen incidents like that where not all people, but there would be a strong move to help those who can't help themselves in an instance. And that is true power. That's God's power at work.
Anybody else have an idea? Go ahead.
I kind of feel like it's also tells the story not to judge a book by its cover. Just because something's small, it's mighty. You know, and if you don't know the whole story, then you're not paying attention to what God's trying to tell us.
Yeah.
Yep.
Barclay points out that a witness must begin with one man. An idea typically starts with a single idea or a single person, and it grows, and it grows, and it grows, and it grows, and you never know which one might be the idea that will grow and become the prevalent one. So Jesus is trying to help his disciples and say, there's 12 of us, and there's millions of people, in the world that we're going to have to try to, get that message to. And don't despair. Start small and plant the seeds, and the seeds will grow, and eventually one may become a big tree. There's a couple other stories that are in the Barclay book. I won't go through them all, but the point was, sometimes it just takes one person to stand up, or not stand up, as the case may be. In the case of Rosa Parks, okay, here's a person in the back of the bus that was in the front of the bus and was told to move to the back, and said, "I'm not going to stand up and move back. I'm very comfortable where I am." That person started a whole movement. In some cases, it takes a person to be the person to stand up. You got to know what you're standing up for, but. And then the next one is a very short one. The kingdom of heaven is like, in this case it says yeast, that the woman took and mixed into a large amount of flour and worked it through all the dough. In the Revised Standard Version, it uses different words. It talks about leaven, and it says, I'll get to the right place here. I just moved it. Anyway, it was talking about the leaven, which is the bread that had the yeast in it, and it's like a sourdough. And it was saying that you pull off a chunk and you keep that, and then you use that as your starting point for your next loaf of bread. I've lost my place in here, but let's keep going.
He's really saying that life will be will be fully bloomed in heaven. Heaven's the end game on,
Right.
on this.
Right.
And you're not gonna see it in this lifetime.
I'm not gonna make it, Scott, because quorum
Oh,
practice is just throwing.
that's fine, no problem. We're doing 13 today. If you do get to a point where you can come in, any of these? Okay, so then the next one moves on and talks about, this is where he explains the parable of the weeds. Would somebody read 37 to 43?
I would, but I can't see these
That's-
small words.
That's fine.
Okay, I'll go. So 37, okay. He answered, "The man who sowed the good seeds is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the sons of the kingdom. The weeds are the sons of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are the angels. As the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into the fiery furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let them hear."
So he's now in an explanation of a parable, providing another statement that we don't understand. There'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
That's famous. That one.
It's famous and it's used in a number of places, but do we really know what it means? And I didn't, and I went on and looked up on the internet and got a write-up that talked about, you remember what it said? Should we look it up again? Because I can't remember the exact words it had. Anybody have an idea before I look it up?
Well, if you don't grow into a good plant, the weeds are the sons of the devil. And if you go his way, it's going to be really unpleasant. He's describing a little bit about what's ahead. He's describing the end game for the people who are righteous and get the message. They're going to have a wonderful eternal life. The ones that are not are going to, they use fire a lot. You're going to be thrown into the fire, but it's going to not be pleasant. Whatever it is, the punishment will be eternal.
And that's what this says. There's all sorts of different other references, but it's the end game. It's the judgment day. There'll be there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. There'll be your judgment and the blazing, throwing them into the blazing furnace. That's when you'll be judged. So that was what that's to refer to.
Right.
I didn't know what gnashing teeth meant.
Well, gnashing of teeth is when you grind your teeth, which we all do, but this is a little more severe.
There'll be pain.
Yeah.
There'll
Suffering.
be some pain. Plus, the dentures back in those days were not that bad. If you do
They
the
were good,
gnashing,
right?
it's gonna hurt when you start gnashing.
I don't even know whether they had any even art dentures back in that time.
They may not have had a lot of
Probably
gnashing
just
of
didn't have
gums.
teeth, yeah. Pat, would you read the 44 through, and 44 and 45?
Sure. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again. And then his joy went and sold all he had and bought Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it.
Okay. So this is suggesting that the kingdom of heaven is compared to a pearl.
Right.
So it's in ancient times, a pearl was one of those things, if you found a beautiful pearl, you would admire it, you'd hold it, it would be your ideal, you'd carry it around, you'd show it to people, look at what I have, isn't this beautiful? And he's trying to say that that's what the kingdom of heaven will be. It'll be a beautiful place, and it'll be something you could admire, and it'll be the loveliest thing in the world.
Yeah.
But you can only get a pearl by putting in a great amount of, you can only obtain one at a great price. So you have to basically dedicate yourself to obtaining this piece of wealth.
I feel like he's saying that he is the pearl and we need to surrender ourselves to him, and that's when we'll have eternal life.
Yeah.
But I could be wrong, but that's the way I hear it.
That's fine.
We all hear it differently.
Yeah, but that's the idea. That's the idea of these parables, is to, what does it tell you? What story do you get out of it? What does it mean to you?
But you have to search for it. You have to
Yes.
work, because it's tough to find the pearl
Yes.
Right.
in the chaos of life.
Mhm.
And look, you're looking at him. You guys listen up.
So the other part of it was having a treasure found in a field, and there's two differences from those stories. One is this person who was out in the field wasn't really searching for the treasure; it just they came upon it. Barclay explains that when people were trying to figure out what to do with their riches, any money they had, particularly because of all the wars, and they were forced to leave their homes. As they got moved from one place to another, they would bury whatever they had that was valuable in their field, and then someone might find that later, or they would hopefully come back to get it and recover it, because they couldn't take it with them or it'd be taken from them. So that's what they would do. So somebody finding something in a buried field was very common. Someone would find a treasure. Okay, and then we go on to the next one, on 47. Marcel, would you like to read 47?
Once again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was let down into the lake and caught all kinds of fish. When it was full, the fishermen pulled it up on the shore. Then they sat down and collected the good fish in baskets, but threw the bad away. This is how it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come and separate the wicked from the righteous and throw them into the fiery furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Have you understood all of these things? Jesus asked.
So we get gnashing twice.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the first time.
Fire too.
Right.
First time
and
I
fire.
realized. I thought that was only a one-time deal.
No.
Oh, no, and Luke uses it too. Matthew and Luke both use it.
They record the.
Yeah. And then he goes on to say, therefore, every teacher of the law who has been instructed about the kingdom of heaven is like the owner of a house who brings out in his storeroom new treasures as well as the old. So the way the fishing was done is they either cast nets from the shore and then pull things in when they would cast a net when they saw a fish and try to pull it in. Or they would do a drag net where they would cast just it out and then pull it down and bring it in either from the boat or near shore, and then you get all sorts of junk, and you have to sort out the junk from the fish that's worth keeping. So the last part of this chapter goes in and talks about something completely different than the parables, and it's really kind of interesting. And it's something I've heard in a lot of different ways. So Jesus goes into his hometown, and he goes in and preaches at the synagogue in his hometown. And people are saying, well, who is this that's preaching to us?
Is this Nazareth?
Yeah, I think it's Nazareth. It's supposed to be Nazareth. Isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't this the son of Mary and the brother of James and Joseph and Simon and Judas and brother of these sisters that they don't even mention? Where did this man get all of this? And they took offense at him. But Jesus said to them, only in his hometown and his own house is a prophet without honor. And he did not do the miracles there because of their lack of their faith. So this is something we always hear. I mean, my joke about being a consultant is I'm only a consultant when I'm away from home. You can't be a consultant in your own office in your own town. You have to go somewhere else to be a consultant because they'll weed you because you came from more than 50 miles away. So it's just typical, right? If you're too close to something, you don't see it. If you know, this is why most ministers can't minister a church where they grew up. They send them somewhere else to minister.
Which, are you talking 14?
No, we're at the end of 13. We're in the last few pages of last few lines of 13.
All right.
Prophet without honor.
Oh, I see, I was down too far, okay. Is this where they ran him out of town?
Well, they didn't run him out of town. They just didn't want to listen to him. They didn't accept him. He couldn't be effective because they remembered him from his youth as a carpenter and the son of a carpenter, and as opposed to remembering him or having him come in and speak with authority.
Right.
So.
Yeah, he always ran into that problem is, what's your authority to say this?
Yeah. Here again, we should not judge a man by his background and his family connections, by what he is. Many have a message has been killed stone dead because not because there was anything wrong with it, but because the minds of the hearers were so prejudiced against the messenger, he never had a chance. So when we meet together to listen to the word of God, we must come with eager expectancy and must not think of the man who speaks, but of the Spirit who speaks through him. So that's 13. 14 is quite different, and talks about John the Baptist and the feeding of the 5,000 and walking on water. So this is not a chapter with many parables, but there's a lot of interesting story. We'll at least cover 14 next week, and we might get into 15. So suggest reading 14 and 15 for next week.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna be out of town the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
So should I do?
Just keep
through
reading.
16
Just keep
and then-
reading, yeah.
So I can catch up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're gonna miss you.
I know, thank
We'll
you.
just be ready to unload.
At 8:45.
We'll be all educated.
Well, thank you for
Can't wait
coming
you
and
to
just
sit down,
and join our
We're
group.
just gonna let you have it.
This is what I need, I love it.
We actually had a peak this summer for our summer series. We probably had 8 or 9 people at one point.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, or maybe
I
even
don't
10.
know where
So,
everybody is.
well,
Vacation, I guess, still.
it's a combination of things. One of our regulars is out camping.
Yeah, they're still out there.
Yeah, and it's just, I don't know, a couple people are under the weather. I don't know where, the others are. So, we did something completely different this summer. We did, we studied Hamilton's Making Sense of the Bible,
Oh,
and
really?
talked about a lot of different interesting and challenging passages of the Bible.
Yeah.
So it was kind of controversial. So actually, we got a group who wanted to come and hear the controversy.
Yeah, that was.
So, or just to be able to discuss those controversial sections. So This is a little more mundane, back to real,
Back to basics.
back to normal Bible study stuff. We try to do something different for the summer, break it up, and have a different approach. So, anyway, thank you everybody for coming, and
Thank you.
we'll tell your bring a friend.
Yeah.